Welcome everyone to the Retired Member Committee's second in a series of monthly talks about topics that are relevant to our lives as retired members and also just to our lives in general. This afternoon's program is devoted to a discussion of what we can do, how we can get repealed the windfall elimination provision and the government pension offset to Social Security, both of which have an impact on all of us who have not only worked as educators in the public system, but also have been employed outside the public school system and have paid into the Social Security system. I might add before we get into our discussion here that the money that you are not receiving from Social Security is money that you have put into Social Security. So it is your money that we're going to be talking about and what we can do collectively to repeal both provisions, which were inaugurated during Ronald Reagan's administration back in 1986. So I want to welcome all of you. Thank you for such a wonderful turnout. And I'm going to turn it over now to Rick.
Thank you. And I'm going to turn it over to the chair of the Retired Members Committee, Patrick Patterson.
Yeah. Second welcome here in terms of, if you probably all have seen the flyer about this event, a series of talks that are going to be taking place. The latest issue of the Reporter, which I think is in the mail at this particular point, has the flyer that we've created. But I think you can also find it in the chat if you're interested in that. Okay. This is the second in the series, and Kip has already gone through a little bit of it. And what I want to say is, I want to just talk about next month, we're going to have Bill Newman of the ACLU, who will be talking about the increase in significance of book banning that's taking place in the US. The presentation last month, and this is the second in the series, centered on the MCAS and the damaging effect it is having on education. The reliance on a standardized test to measure student learning fails to take account of the culture that students come from. Quite simply, one size does not fit all. At that presentation, we heard about organizing efforts in 5 different communities across the state, including New Bedford, Cambridge, Brookline, and Northampton, as well as a successful opt-out campaign in upstate New York. Today's presentation is focused on dignified retirement, and I will introduce, you've already seen the facilitator for that. We all know an important element in a dignified retirement really goes beyond simple how much you make. It also includes how engaged you are. And I think it's important for a dignified retirement is remaining engaged and finding opportunities for the use of our knowledge and wisdom. We are hoping you will join us in our effort to support, to organize this effort in support for the Thrive Act, the MCAS ballot question, and other initiatives of the Retired Members Group. So anyway, the facilitator for today, which you've already seen, is Kip Fonch. Kip is on the Retired Members Committee and is on the MTA board as a representative for retirees. He taught high school in Amherst, Massachusetts, and was president of the Teachers Union. He retired a number of years ago, and for that reason alone, he has a very special interest in the topic of today's presentation. And so now I turn it over to you, Kip. Go ahead. And you're muted.
Let me just say a few words about the WEP and the GPO. The WEP, the windfall elimination pension, not pension, what am I saying? provision reduces benefits for retired or disabled workers who have fewer than 30 years of employment covered by Social Security if they also receive pensions based on non-covered employment. Speaking personally, I receive a monthly check from Social Security for approximately $200 a month. And I have determined that that is about $600 less than what I'm entitled to, were it not for the WEP. The GPO, or the government pension offset, under current law, requires that the eligible spouse of a living retired or disabled worker is entitled to a monthly Social Security benefit that equals up to 50% of the worker's monthly benefit. A surviving spouse is entitled to the full amount. When spouses are eligible for benefits on the basis of their own covered earnings, their spousal benefit is reduced by that amount. So again, it's money that either you yourself or your spouse has put into this system that you're not getting back. And there is currently in the House, HR 82 would amend Title II of the Social Security Act to eliminate both the windfall elimination provision, the WEP, and the government pension offset, the GPO. So one consequence of this session today is that we hope that you will be encouraged to contact your representative and have your family and people you know contact their representatives to work to repeal, or to support rather, excuse me, House 82. And with that as a introduction, Anthony Mareshi is also with us from MTA. Anthony?
Thanks, Kip. And I think Arthur's actually going to get us started
Okay, sorry.
on the COLA piece.
One thing I would ask is that if people could mute so that we don't have any interference with barking dogs or our automobile horns blowing in the background. Arthur?
Okay, should I go ahead?
Arthur, before you start, Inez, would you mind just explaining how questions and answers are going to work?
Absolutely. So everyone, you will be able to get into the question and answers by looking at your menu on the bottom of the screen. You might have the ellipses that says more. And when you click that, you'll see Q&A, basically. You'll see the word Q&A. And there you'll be able to pose a question. You'll need to identify who you are. And as our team on this end answers those questions, you'll be able to see the answered questions up on the screen. And yeah, that's it.
Okay, let me go ahead. First of all, I'm not going to talk about either the WPE or the GPO. I'm going to talk about pensions from Massachusetts, or from people who've worked in the public sector in Massachusetts. Also, in our glitches in getting going, I didn't get introduced, so I should introduce myself. I'm retired from the University of Massachusetts, Boston, where I taught economics for several decades. And I also worked some after I retired for the MTA. I was active in the faculty union at the University of Massachusetts. My talk to you is going to be a little bit about economics today, but very little. It's basically a talk about arithmetic. I want to illustrate for you what happens to our pensions over time. And as you see from the title, we often start out with what we might feel is a pretty good pension. But the longer we live, the lower the buying power of our pension becomes, simply due to inflation. Now, to work this out over what would happen to people who start their pensions in the current fiscal year and go on for 10 years, I have created this little chart. Anthony, if you could go to the next slide. what this shows is you don't have to pay much attention to this, but I want to tell you about it. So if you want to look at it later on, it will be online, and you can check what happens to particular pensions. To work out this table, I assumed that inflation over the next 10 years would average 3%. And I also assumed that the COLA base, that is the amount of your pension that gets adjusted for inflation, would remain $13, and that the legislature, in its wisdom, would decide that the COLA base should be increased by 3%. Now, to give you an illustration and focus on one particular level, let me look at what happens with the pension of $50,000 that a person has. He or she retires, and in the current fiscal year starts with a pension of $50,000. Anthony, could you go to the next slide? So there you have the first line, shows what your pension is in the current fiscal year. Now, if that's raised by on the COLA base, which is $13,000, and that's what it is currently, that would add $390 to your pension each year for the next 10 years. So in 2034, your pension would be $53,900. However, with the inflation at 3% a year during this time, your pension in terms of buying power would have dropped from $50,000 to $40,106.67. In other words, compared to the year in which you started your pension, you would have lost $9,893.33, which is almost 20% of the buying power of your pension, which is not very nice. And I think all of us know that the things we need have not declined by anywhere close to 20%. In many ways, they've gone up. I find myself, having retired 15 plus years ago, that I can't do all the repairs around my house. I have to hire more people to do them. That's just an example. But anyway, this is what happens at $50,000. Now, the MTA has been trying to do some repair work by getting the COLA base raised from 13,000 to 18,000. And this table shows what would happen in that case. The nominal pension would go up by $540 a year, so it would be $55,400. But with the 3% inflation taking place, the buying power of the whole would still drop to a little over $41,000. In other words, almost $9,000 of your buying power would still be lost. Not quite as bad at 17.5% decline, but still pretty bad. Going to 25,000, there's a little more improvement, and it really makes a significant difference. Now we're down from 20,000, 20% being lost to a little over 14% being lost. That's still not a very pleasant way to go about taking care of oneself, but it would certainly be an improvement to get that extra amount of money put on the COLA base. Now, I want to emphasize that this is not the way it has been permanently in Massachusetts. Indeed, the situation has gotten worse over time. If we look at a fictional person, fictional because she or he would still be alive today, having retired in 1970 with a pension of $10,000. Now, $10,000, if some of you may remember, was pretty good in 1970. If that pension, however, had been increased along with inflation, it would today amount to $76,500. Well, this is not, I made these calculations for the MTA last November, a year ago. If that pension, however, if the whole pension not just the COLA base, but the whole pension had been increased annually by the rate approved by the Commonwealth, the pension would have amounted to $55,000. So it's still a big decline from what inflation would have done to it. In other words, you would have lost that person, my fictional person, would have had their pension reduced by almost 30%, 29% to be precise. Now, if we look at the last slide I have here, you can sort of see what's happened. The COLA base in 1971, which is as far back as I could get it, was $6,000. And that has been raised, if you look at the first column, there to 7,000, 8,000, 9,000, 12,000, and 13,000 since 2012, and it stayed at 13,000. Now, in November, $22, it hasn't gone up, it's gone down. That is, if we adjust for that money to the inflation that's taken place since it was set in motion, it's dropped from almost 44,000 to 13,000 today. Now, I couldn't compare this with the actual pensions people have. The data are not available, but I could compare it with teachers, K through 12 teachers' salaries in the year for which we're looking at. So if you look at 1971, the COLA base was 68% of the average teacher's salary. Now, since the pension would be less than the average teacher's salary, it's even greater, would be even greater. It has dropped continuously. That is, each time we look at each time the COLA base was changed, it was lower than the last time in relation to teacher salary, and lower still as we go along, dropping down to the 13,000 today, which is 15% of the average teacher's salary. So in trying to do something about this, we're only asking that we do what was done when many of us entered the teaching profession. That is, certainly if people retiring now, a great many of us were in by 1981 when the pension, the COLA base was 41%. Maybe some of us were here in 1971 when the COLA base was 68%, and now it's 15% of the average teacher's salary. So things have gotten worse and worse in this respect. The efforts of the MTA make a small difference if they got accepted. I don't mean that as a criticism. I think they would be an important first step, but only a first step in moving us back to where we once were and where we should be. Patrick said that the money we get isn't the only thing that contributes to our dignity and well-being, and that's certainly true. But the money we get is certainly an important factor in allowing us in retirement to lead lives that have some dignity associated with them. And certainly the pension system now is not set up in a way that does that. So I hope you all take this into account. If you want to look at this further, it will all be online. And also will be online a much longer explanation of these tables. They were, as I said, were part of a report that was prepared for the MTA to use in its efforts with the legislature last fall, and the whole report will be online as well with these tables. So thank you very much, and I hope you find that useful. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box.
Thank you, Arthur. I might add on top of what Arthur's chart shows, the last increase in the last COLA increase was 3% of $13,000, which is $390 before taxes. So even if you had the entire 390, divide that by 12, and you get less than $39 a month for the increase in your pension. So we're not talking about getting rich and moving to Aruba, because of this. This really needs to be looked at. There's a question in the chat from Debbie Hathaway. I have an understanding of how the WEP affects my income here in Massachusetts. Can someone explain why Massachusetts teachers are affected by this and other states such as New Hampshire, I think, are not? Thank you. Anyone care to venture?
If
Uh,
you don't mind, it would,
That's the end of the program. I'll be doing that at the end of the program.
no,
It's the last
no.
thing.
Let's go to Anthony first to get some more about the
Okay.
COLA, and then
sorry.
we'll deal with some COLA
Okay.
questions. If
And
you don't-
That sounds good.
Anthony, if you could tell people where online, the second question we got from Jane Singer asks where online these slides and the other material will be. And so if you could pass that information on, it would be useful.
Yeah, so hi, everyone. Again, my name is Anthony Mareschi. I work in MTA's Government Relations Division. I'm very happy to be here with you all. I actually just dumped in the chat the link to Arthur's report, which I really do encourage you all to read. He found in a really concise and I think impactful way the ability to describe what we've been trying to share with legislators for years about how woefully inadequate the current pension system is. So it's a very effective tool for actually laying that story out in very hard numbers. So you can access it at the link I just shared in the chat, and then you'll have access to all of our slide materials. You should, and Inez can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you'll all be getting an email after this presentation with an evaluation form. And in that, I think you'll have a copy of these slides, but if not, we'll make sure that they get out to you in some way after we're done here today.
Anthony, if I could just quickly interject that Bob Miller asked the question of what is the COLA base? Let me just clarify that.
Sure.
The COLA base is the amount of your pension that gets adjusted by whatever the legislature decides to adjust it by. I mean, it's a cost of living, it's a COL. I can't remember what the A stands for. So it has been for the last decade, $13,000. And that's the only part of your pension that gets adjusted for inflation. And in many years, it's not been sufficient to adjust, even for that $13,000 has not been adjusted by the full rate of inflation. But that's what it is.
Perfect. Thank you, Arthur. So Arthur outlined sort of where we've been, I think, over the last 50 or so years in terms of the COLA base and what that means in a very real way for all of your pensions as time goes on and the COLA isn't adjusted. I want to talk about what the MTA in more detail, because I know Arthur alluded to it, but in more detail about what the MTA is trying to do to address it. Obviously, the ideal would be that there's a COLA on the entirety of your pension that actually matches inflation every year. But I think we need to take a first step, and to us, that first step is increasing the base. But first, I just wanted to highlight, and you're going to know a lot of this, but why a COLA increase is so urgent. Arthur's chart showed this, but it's been more than a decade since the COLA base has been raised. It was raised from 12,000 to 13,000 back in 2011, 2012. And if you go back again in Arthur's chart to 1971, at that point, the base was $6,000. So it's barely doubled in a little over 50 years. And again, has not been raised in a decade. This is something that you all know firsthand, but inflation is really eroding the value of pensions over time. I'll talk a little bit more about them towards the end of the presentation, but you all should have received in the mail a COLA advocacy card from from MTA that we're going to be delivering to the legislature. And pretty much every card, as I'm going through those, talks about how costs keep going up and up and up, especially in recent years, but pensions have just not kept pace with those cost increases. So as Kip mentioned, this past year, our COLA increase was 3% on the first $13,000 in pension benefits. That's what it is typically. In FY23, as some of you may remember, the legislature approved and the governor signed a 5% COLA increase. Still on that first $13,000 in pension benefits, but it was the first increase of any kind in over a decade. And I think that gives us some momentum in this moment to continue to hammer away at this issue and try to get a more long-term structural fix via the base, because I do think the fact that it was raised to 5% just for that 1 year serves as an acknowledgement, I think, from the legislature on their behalf, that they know the current system isn't cutting it. So what we really need is a longer term fix. Social Security GPO WEP, I think this one is super clear for many of you. If you do receive Social Security, it's a benefit that's dramatically reduced. But if you don't receive anything at all, your pension's your only source of retirement income. So it's really important that that remains with a constant and effective purchasing power so you can meet any needs that you have. And then lastly, you know, we're fighting for this because you deserve it. I think the teacher wage penalty is well documented. I think there's a promise implicit with public service that you're going to take a little bit less than you could have made compared maybe to some of your private sector colleagues. But at the end of that service, at the end of your public service, is going to be a pension that can help maintain your dignity in retirement. And the Commonwealth, to be blunt, has not been living up to that promise, especially over the last decade plus. So now is the time to do something about it. So what are we proposing? The MTA's filed this legislation for the past, I think, 3 sessions to increase the COLA base. There's 2 COLA provisions in here that I'll talk about. There's also 2 health insurance related provisions included in this bill that I'll touch on briefly. Obviously not directly related to COLA, but still important. So our legislation would immediately increase the COLA base from that current level of $13,000 to $18,000. And again, that would be immediately. So if this bill were to pass tomorrow, this would be effective in the next fiscal year. So in a typical year, then the legislature may fund the COLA at 3% on 18,000 if we're successful instead of 13,000. But over time, so we don't need to keep going back and advocating for a COLA base increase, you know, every couple of years, we'd actually link the base in our proposal to Social Security's maximum benefit for an individual worker, which is around $43,000 this year. So basically over a period of 17 years under our proposal, the COLA base would continue to rise from this $18,000 number until it lines up with Social Security's maximum benefit. The idea being there, Social Security members who actually receive their full benefit get a COLA every year on their full benefit. So for our members who are either receiving a reduced Social Security benefit or no Social Security at all, we feel that they should be having a COLA that's at least equal to what Social Security is getting. So that's the idea behind this proposal. And then quickly, just 2 other pieces of policy in this bill, again, related to health insurance. Our language in this bill would freeze municipal retiree health insurance premium splits at the rate you're paying upon retirement. So for example, if you retired tomorrow with an 80-20 split with your municipality for your health insurance, you picking up 80, the employer picking up 20, they can't drop you down to say 50-50 10 years down the road. Whatever your split is when you retire would be locked in under our legislation so that when you're planning for retirement, you don't have your budget dramatically change, say 10 years into your retirement period, and all of a sudden your health insurance costs are skyrocketing. And then we're also trying to cap out-of-pocket healthcare expenses for non-Medicare eligible retirees. So Massachusetts does participate in Medicare, but for certain retirees who started their service prior to 1986, they're non-Medicare eligible. So these folks are actually paying basically active employee health insurance rates in their communities while living on a pension or reduced Social Security. So we want to try to bring some measure of cost certainty to this group of retirees for their health insurance. So you may have seen me talk about this chart before. This is just a overview of the legislative process and all the steps that bills need to go through before they become law. We're in the committee process right now. You'll see right there with the circle. We had a hearing with the Public Service Committee on our bill back in June. We had a really good turnout. We had several members of the Retired Members Committee speak in support of our bill, as well as MTA leadership. Since that time, the Public Service Committees continued to review all the bills under their jurisdiction and hold more hearings. So that's where we are right now. Our goal, obviously, is with all of our legislative priorities is to try to get them to move along in the legislative process. And I think from this chart, the legislative process seems pretty straightforward. In reality, it's actually a lot more complicated. I imagine it's that way in most states, but I think that's particularly the case in Massachusetts for reasons that I'll talk about next. So in Massachusetts, there's 7,000 bills that have been filed this legislative session, and they touch all sorts of policy areas from retirement, education funding, testing, you name it, there's probably a bill on it. In the Public Service Committee alone, which is where our proposal is, there's over 300 bills dealing with the section of a chapter of Massachusetts general law that we're actually trying to change. So not necessarily the same specific thing, but it just gives you the idea of how many public service related proposals are before the legislature. So we're constantly trying to get our proposals at the top of that pile so they can be prioritized. And then you look at that 7,000 bill number, only around 72 plus, because this fluctuates every couple of days, bills have actually made it through that process you saw to the governor's desk and become law. Now, you may have also seen a Boston Globe article over the last week or so. The vast majority of those 72 bills are very specific, non-controversial proposals. So creditable service bills for individual workers, giving a community a charter change to their municipal charter, renaming bridges, all that sort of stuff. The legislature has actually only passed a handful of what you would call major policy bills this session, and we'd throw our COLA bill into that category. So the legislature, may look here like they've done a lot, but again, the vast majority are very specific, non-controversial bills that have actually made it through the process. So what are the hurdles? Timeline. So there's something called the Joint Rule 10 deadline in the legislature. This is the deadline by which committees, there's some exceptions, but most committees have to report out on the bills that are under their jurisdiction. And this deadline is February 7th, upcoming 2024. So basically by that deadline, every committee has to give their bill a favorable recommendation, which means it moves on to the next step in the process, probably another committee. An unfavorable, which kills the bill. A study order, which is effectively another way to kill a bill, just under a nicer name, or get an extension, which basically just gives the committee more time to review the bill deeper into the session. So that's the first deadline that we're looking at for our bill. And then more broadly, the legislature under its rules has to wrap up all official formal business by July 31st, 2024, after which the legislature recesses, legislators, go back to the districts, start running for re-election, all that. So really it's the next 7 or so months where any bills that are going to move this session are going to start to gain traction. We're also dealing with a system that is becoming increasingly filled with inaction and delays. You may have seen in the news or from some correspondence recently from MTA around our higher ed contracts and how hard it's been to try to get those, which should be a totally non-controversial issue, signed into law. So this is a body that does run into delays often. They often go down to the wire on policy proposals only to not finish by their deadlines. And then next thing you know, it gets kicked to the next session. So we got to sort of work through that backlog of things that are trying to get done. The decision-making process in the legislature. So it operates in a very top-down way in the Massachusetts State House, meaning that you really need legislative leadership to be in support of a proposal or to buy into that proposal in order for it to have a strong chance of moving. And there's a lot of ways you can do that in terms of trying to build pressure, grassroots pressure to force the issue and to make it seem like it's something that actually really needs to get done. And then one thing that we are hearing about COLA is just questions about short and long-term financial cost, because there are questions about how a COLA base increase would increase the pension liability, as well as any given year budget in terms of money that the state actually has to put out to pay for that COLA in a given year. So obviously, we'll talk to legislators about those questions as they arise. But I think to some extent, there's an even greater cost to doing nothing, which is borne by all of you as you continue to weather this pension system that, again, is woefully inadequate. So there's definitely questions of cost, but this is something that's so important that the legislature needs to figure out a way to do something. So what you can do to try to push things against all those hurdles I talked about and in this sort of complicated process, the best way I found to do that is to make something a must do for the legislature. So we saw that with the Student Opportunity Act. For years, MTA, public education advocates, and others had been pushing for the legislature to implement the Foundation Budget Review Commission recommendations. The legislature failed to do so in one session towards the deadline. We came back the next year. Everyone realized they had to get something done because there was so much external pressure coming up to force them to do something. So that's the sort of grassroots pressure we need to generate for COLA to get it on the legislature's radar. And again, make it so that they feel like they have to do something. So I know I'm a little bit over time, but I'm going to have some actions that we'd love for you all to take later in this session after we wrap up the other pieces of presentations. But one thing I do want to mention quickly is you all should have gotten this COLA card in the mail from MTA. We're gathering stories from all of our members that we want to deliver to the Public Service Committee to highlight the urgency of finally getting that COLA increase. So if you haven't returned this card or you've lost it, misplaced it, whatever, please get it in. Or if you need another one, I'll share my email, send me a note, we can get it to you. But we want to try to get as many members as possible to share their stories with the legislature, again, to highlight how urgent this really is. So that's it for me. Happy to answer any questions. And then again, I'll come back at the end with some actions that we're hoping you all can take. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Bob Whalen. I'm a retired member organizer. A lot of you do know me from events and stuff. And I answer, excuse me, I answer a lot of questions about the GPO and the WEP. I seem to have become the resource on it. So I want to give you like an overview of it. There's a lot of misinformation about the GPO WEP. And I want to clear some of that up because people don't understand. We got one in the chat or the question and answered about why we're affected and other states aren't. Well, in 1935, when Social Security became it came into existence, states were given an option to join the Social Security system or to keep whatever system they may have in place if they had one in place. Massachusetts had a very vibrant retirement system in 1935, much better benefit than the Social Security benefit that people would be receiving had they entered Social Security. And so they were already paying into the system, the Massachusetts system, 5%, probably 5% at the time was low at that at that point, but now it's it's up to 11% that you're paying out of your income to as withholdings for the retirement. But we opted to, as a state, to stay out of Social Security. Actually, at that time in 35, the WEP and the GPO did not exist. The states, municipal governments couldn't even get into the GPO and the WEP. I mean, into the Social Security system until the 1950s. So we didn't have the real option in 35, and we never decided to go into the system when we could. So in 1986, the Reagan administration, 1983, they started discussing the GPO and the WEP, the ways to save Social Security some money, because they accused our members of double dipping, that you were receiving your Social Security, full Social Security, and a full state pension, and therefore you were double dipping, which we all know is not really the way to put it. It's your money, you paid into it, you should be getting it back. But about 26 states opted to stay out of Social Security altogether. We were one of them. Other states are doing both, and other states are just in Social Security, so they don't have a pension plan behind them, the teachers or the municipal or the state employees. We were one of the states, the 15 states, 26 states, I'm sorry, that opted to stay out of Social Security and keep our plan. Teachers in 15 states are affected as we are by the same issues of GPO and WEP, but it's a federal law under the Social Security Act. It is not a state law. It is not something Massachusetts ever agreed to do, other than to not go into the Social Security system 1935. And it is a creature. Any change in this law, it's got to become is a creature of the Congress, not the state legislature. So people ask me a lot of times, why have we not done something in Massachusetts? Why did Massachusetts agree to do this? Why can't we change it? Well, because it's congressional. It's federal. We didn't agree to it, and we just live with it. The other one option that is possible for GPO WEP to get it so it's not affecting us is for our members to pay into Social Security as well. And the question would be whether you get rid of the retirement system slowly and add people into Social Security, or you keep both, which means people would pay up about 20% of their income to retirement plans as teachers, as new teachers, as teachers anyway, because they pay 7.5% for Social Security, and about 11%, upwards of 11% for Massachusetts with their retirement plus and stuff. So that was a decision that was made a long time ago. It had nothing to do with the GPO WEP. In 1986, these two lists, they were implemented in 1986 by the Reagan administration. It took 3 years to kind of get, they lagged into being They sort of went in slowly. They didn't become effective immediately. So since 1986, it's really been a priority of the NEA and the MTA to try to get these things taken care of, and we haven't had a great deal of success. We have a bill filed every year that gets put into this committee, and our problem is getting it out of committee. And the bill is Social Security Act of 2023, was filed on January 9th of this year. That it is filed every 2-year session. They file a new bill. So it's filed in January, and it started accumulating sponsors, co-sponsors. And as it stands now, I looked yesterday, there are 300 bipartisan co-sponsors, 99 Republicans and 201 Democrats have signed on to the bill. Question is if they're really behind it, because if it ever comes up for a vote, we'll know. If we get it out of committee and it comes up for a vote, we'll know how committed they are to getting rid of WEP and GPO, or if they're just giving us lip service. But that's where the bill stands right now, and that's really kind of where it is. And we've got to unwedge it from committee. We almost did it last year. The fact that we have 300 signatures on the legislation is called a supermajority in the Congress. It's a supermajority of co-sponsors. So the thought was last year they'd be able to get it out of the committee by the 300-person plus co-sponsors on the bill. It got out of the committee, but they voted on something different, and I don't know exactly why they didn't vote on the GPO WEP exactly, because there's a few pieces of legislation that deal similarly with GPO and WEP, and they don't eliminate them, they modify them. And that's not going to solve our problem, because it's not going to get rid of them. It's just going to change the formula. So it didn't get out of committee last year. Hopefully, with this supermajority, we can get it out of committee this year, and get a vote, get at least a floor vote, so we know if our legislators who have committed to it are truly committed. All of Massachusetts congressional delegation is signed on to the legislation. Richie Neal out of Western Mass may not be signed on because he's got an alternative bill, which is a modification of the WEP portion that he's been pushing for a few years. Again, it wouldn't solve the problem. It would just modify the formula a little bit, so you wouldn't be hit so hard by the WEP. And I'll get into the specifics about the WEP and the GPO, just so you know what they are in a little more detail. But that's kind of where the legislation stands. That's where where the fight needs to be in Congress. And one of the things I feel like needs to happen at MTA, and I'm going to be leaving in 3 weeks. But a retirees problem is an active members problem. It may not have come up yet because they're not retired, but when they retire, this becomes their problem, and they live with it. And a lot of the calls I get from people are people who say, "I didn't know this existed. Why didn't someone tell me about this?" So part of this is an educational campaign to get you to understand, if you've never heard of the GPO and the WEP, what they are. But if you haven't heard of it, one of the things I do in my retirement workshops is push the GPO WEP every time I do one, because I want people to understand. And when I ask people to raise their hand about GPO WEP, I say 85% of the people in a training don't even know they exist. So that's just a problem. And I think we need to educate people that this exists, and it's going to really hurt you when you retire. So that's part of the plan. But I think our active membership needs to also be involved in this fight, because it's their fight too. And they've got the numbers behind them to really get this moving. So I really think we need a campaign that's going to work on this, educate people about it, the reality of it, and engage our active members to become part of it. The WEP, just to give you a little brief description of the windfall elimination provision, again, was enacted. It was enacted in 86. It came into effect in 1983. They started talking about it. It impacts employees who are going for their retirement, for teachers who are going, we'll use teachers as an example. Teachers that are going for their own retirement plan under Social Security. And in order to be eligible for Social Security, you need to have 40 quarters of credit in Social Security, or 10 years of Social Security earnings and payments. So if you've got that you meet that threshold, and a lot of it, I'm sorry about my dog. A lot of people meet that threshold because they worked before school, become a teacher. They worked as a teacher. They worked part-time. They worked summers. So it doesn't take much to get to that 10-year threshold. So a lot of people are affected by this. And if you meet that threshold, the WEP comes in and it modifies the calculation that is used to define your benefit. And it decreases your Social Security benefit by about 40% from what it should be or what it would be if you didn't have the WEP involved. And what but it maxes out, the WEP maxes out. So it cannot take more than half your Social Security benefit. And it did not go over $567 a month in 2023. So the maximum you're going to get hit, which is a lot, is by $567 a month on your Social Security benefit. So it is, I would get into the formula, but it's complicated. It's a complicated formula that Social Security uses to establish your benefit. It's a 3-tier thing, and different levels of income get hurt or get affected. If between 10 years and 20 years of Social Security credits, there's really nothing you can do. The WEP is going to hurt you. At 20 years of what they call substantial earnings, and substantial earnings is a Social Security term that they establish every year. They establish a level of substantial earnings. And if you make that or more in your Social Security job, you acquire a year of substantial earnings to put on, to kind of, you keep that in reserve. If you've got 20 years of credit, of 21 years of substantial earnings, the WEP starts to decrease by 5% every year until you have 30 years of substantial earnings under your belt. Then it goes away completely, or you get the same calculation as the other retirees that are out there. So it goes from like a 40% calculation factor to back to 90% where it is for regular retirees. So it goes up 45% to 40 to 45 to 50 to 55% every year that you've acquired another year of substantial earnings. It's hard to acquire substantial earnings. It's not a formula for substantial earnings. I'm not really sure how the Social Security Administration calculates it. I haven't seen the formula for it, but it definitely it requires almost, this year it was 2021. I looked at it, was $26,550, which is probably a full-time job of some at a low level of income of hourly rate, but it's definitely probably a full-time job. So if you're working part-time or summers, you're not going to get the substantial earnings. You're not going to earn them. You're not going to earn those years. But a lot of our vocational teachers have earned 30 years of substantial earnings as a tradesperson, come into teaching, and they don't get affected by the WEP because the 30 years covers them. But anywhere between 10 years of Social Security benefit, of Social Security credit, to 30 years of Social Security credit, you're going to be affected some way by the WEP. This is a chart for substantial earnings since 1937. So this gives you a sense of how much, what the value of substantial earnings is. And this is the chart of the other chart. The second chart, it tells you how it goes from 40% calculation to a 90% calculation. That's sort of the proportion of the income that goes into your Social Security. Starts at 40% if you're hit by the WEP, and if you don't get hit by the WEP, it's calculated at 90% of that income goes into your Social Security benefit. I have a training on this, but it's really complicated. I don't have time to really talk about the details of the calculation. So, but WEP is particularly harsh on our ESP members. They're making a low income anyway, and they're being impacted the same way. What WEP does is they think you're double dipping because they think that because Social Security is weighted towards the lower pay earning members of the society, they get a more proportional benefit than people that are high earners. That teachers are high earners in their mind, so that you should be getting paid. You should be getting a lower Social Security benefit. You shouldn't get the same effect that a grocery store worker has gotten who makes minimum wage in their Social Security considerations. I agree. I mean, I think it's a bunch of crap. I think what it really comes down to is they wanted to figure out a way to screw people who didn't pay Social Security their whole career, so they found their way to get their money back by instituting the WEP. I'm just going to quickly cover the government pension offset, in my opinion, and it hurts less people, I think, but I think it's more draconian even than the WEP. And the government pension offset affects people, mostly women, because of the demographics. Women live longer than men. Mostly women who are going for their survivor benefit, their Social Security survivor benefit, because they just lost their spouse, and they were counting on that Social Security survivor benefit to survive. The GPO, if you are earning if you're going for the Social Security benefit, higher survivor benefit, and you're earning and you're receiving a state pension under Massachusetts, the GPO steps in and it takes 2/3 of your pension and deducts it, offsets it from your Social Security survivor benefit. So 2/3 of what you make as a pension gets calculated and then it gets deducted directly from dollar for dollar from the Social Security survivor benefit, which in many cases means every dollar is gone. So a lot of our widows and widowers out there who've lost their spouse and need their Social Security benefit, survivor benefit to survive are getting zero, absolutely zero. And as much as much more of an impact in that situation because the money is so much more desperately needed by someone who's surviving the loss of a spouse. But it is it doesn't affect. There are some people actually as well, and this will be the last thing I say. Some member of our members will get hit by the WEP when they retire because they're a teacher. Then when their spouse dies, who may have been a Social Security worker their whole lives, they also get affected by the WEP. I mean the GPO. So they get hit by both of them. And it's really, I mean, it needs to change. We're getting closer. It's getting some traction, but I just don't know. It's going to be a fight, and I think we need to get a broader coalition of people, including, and there are a lot of efforts now to push out to states that don't get affected by the WEP and the GPO and ask them to sort of come in and help us. And it's working in some places and it's not working in others, but it definitely needs to be dealt with. I mean, it's that bad, but I think this is an example I just put on the screen. If you were receiving a Social Security benefit, pension of $3,000 a month, let's just say, and your spouse dies with $2,000 a month of Social Security, you get a $2,000 Social Security survivor benefit under Social Security. If you take 2/3 of your pension, it's going to be $2,000. It's going to wipe it out completely. This person loses everything because 2/3 of her pension is $2,000, which is equal to the Social Security benefit she received, and the whole thing goes away. So you don't have to pay in if you're over, but you may get, $20 or $30 if you don't get affected by the whole thing, but you are definitely impacted. 2/3 of that benefit, dollar for dollar, gets pulled from your Social Security. So it's really hurting people a great deal. This is the Social Security Fairness Act of 2023. Very quickly, this other Equal Treatment of Public Servants Act is the Richie Neal bill. This would just modify the calculation of the WEP. It would do nothing for the GPO. It would leave the GPO intact. It would modify the calculation for the WEP for people that are retiring prospectively. It would not affect anybody under the Richie Neal bill that has already retired. You would get $100 or $150 extra a month under that bill to make up for what was being taken from your pension, thus every month. But you would not it would not repeal the bill, the law, so that the WEP and the GPO would still be intact to some extent. And a lot of people are of the mind that modifying the formula needs to happen, but it's probably a better solution to get rid of it completely. So Richie Neal's bill is getting a little traction. I think the NEA supports the Richie Neal bill. I worry that if we just pass the Richie Neal bill, they'll stop passing anything. They'll never get to the whole WEP altogether. So anyway, that's just my commentary. I'll let Kip tell you about what NEA's doing. He works with the NEA on this issue and what they're doing and what we can maybe do going forward. And in fact, I'll take any questions when we get to the end.
Thank you, Robert. His point about Representative Neal's bill is spot on. That bill would not do us any favors. The objective is to repeal the WEP and the GPO. Right now, there are two bills that are under discussion or in the process, the legislative machine, if you will. One is House Bill 82. That's House Bill 82. And see if I can find the Senate bill. I thought I had it. I'm sorry.
597. Senate 597.
That's it. Thank you very much. 597. Thank you. Both of those bills are contemporary. They address repealing the WEP and the GPO, and they're the ones that you should be writing about. not Richie Neal's. Richie Neal's. His is not going to benefit us at all.
Yep. So I'm gonna have one action that I'd love for everyone to do right now, which would be awesome, and that's send an email to your legislators about the COLA bill that the MTA is pushing for. It can take like 2 minutes. I'll dump the link in the chat, you click on it, you enter in your information, it automatically finds who your legislators are. And then we have a pre-populated template. You don't even have to edit it, urging your legislators to support the bill. Just click submit. And then if everyone on this call does it, we can get 66 emails over to the legislature right now, urging action on the COLA, which is the sort of steady drumbeat that we're going to need to be doing. So I'm going to dump that in the chat. You should all see it. If you just click on it, it's going to take you right to our action alert page. And then you'll see a spot where you can put your name, address, all that. And then it should be pretty straightforward getting that out. And then while you all do that, and I'm happy to answer any questions, one other thing I do just want to mention in terms of other actions. So we have the COLA cards. Please continue to get those in. I dump my email address in the chat. If you don't have one, please just send me a note. We can get one to you. In addition, look out for the next issue of the Retiree Reporter. We have in there a directory of every legislator in the House and Senate and where they are on our COLA bill, whether or not they're supporting it, along with their phone numbers. So if we can generate as many phone calls as possible to those legislators, both those who are supporting us already and those who are not, I think that can be really effective. Because even those who are already on the bill, we want to make sure they take that extra step and actually advocate for the bill to move along in the legislative process. So be on the lookout for that in the next edition of the Reporter.
I think that we need to bring everything to a close, but I think this is an incredible group that there's probably several people who are willing to kind of get together and truly do some really good organizing around this. And, you know, as a member of the Retired Members Committee, you know, we would like to, you know, move forward on a lot of these issues, on these really important issues. So I appreciate everybody coming out and do this, and for a conversation that needs to, as so many people mentioned, needs to turn into organizing.